recorded. Okay, welcome to Psych 232, Theories of Personality. Today we're talking about Erikson, okay, and it's chapter 6. Erikson's theory falls under what we call the lifespan approach. His theory covers the entire lifespan. Okay, so we're going to be talking about stages, basically from infancy, from birth until basically old age and death, basically. It's a very interesting theory, in my opinion. And let's just get right to it. Oh, just so you know, Erikson is also one of those people who lived around the time of Freud, he could also be considered a neo-Freudian. Okay, and some of his parts of his theory are similar to Freud's theory, and I'll point that out. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so for Erikson's theory, we have psychosocial stages of development. Okay, so they are psychosocial, basically. So they're psychological and social. Okay, the environment, what happens as far as parenting and all that stuff, what's happening in the environment also matters. But some of these things that happen are also part of our normal course of development, normal maturity. Okay, so it's psychosocial. It's both psychological and social. Erikson did place a lot of emphasis on what's happening socially. Okay, so let's talk about this. So Erikson's stages of personality. So according to Erikson, each person goes through 8 stages of personality development. 8 stages. Okay, the first 4 stages are actually very similar to Freud's theory. Okay, they're going to sound different. But if we talk about them, we think about them, you'll see that they're actually similar, and I will point out how they are similar. Personality is determined by both biological and social factors, according to Erikson. Okay. For Freud, it was a little bit more biological, but Freud placed a lot of emphasis on what's happening socially, what's happening in the environment, especially with parenting and other things, just related to just growing up. Okay. There is a crisis for each stage. The crisis is a personal conflict at each stage that necessitates some change in our behavior and personality. So there is a crisis. There is a kind of a problem that you face at each stage. It's something that must be solved. And the way you solve it determines how the next stage is going to go, how the next stages are going to go. Okay. Each conflict must be resolved to resume the normal sequence of next stages. If you have an unresolved problem at one stage, it will affect you at other stages. And I'll mention how that is, okay? There is also a basic strength, a virtue to be derived after successful crisis resolution. Okay, each stage will also have a basic strength, something that you gain from resolving that crisis correctly. Okay, so let's talk about these stages. So the first stage is called the oral sensory stage. Okay, it's birth to about 1 year of age, maybe birth to about 1.5. Notice it's called the oral sensory stage. For Freud, it was the oral stage. So you can already see some similarity there with just the name. So during the oral sensory stage, according to Erikson, the infant is dependent on the mother for survival, for security, for affection. Okay, and the mouth provides the means for nurturing and affection. Okay, that's exactly what Freud said. Okay, it's very similar. But Erikson takes that further, okay? According to Erikson, basically the crisis that comes up, I'll point that out for you because it doesn't say crisis. The crisis is basically answering the question, is the world hurtful and scary? Or is the world kind and trustworthy? So the infant must determine basically whether the world is a place that we can trust, or the world is a place of mistrust. Okay, if things go well, the infant will develop a sense of trust. Okay, sense of trust. That means the mother meets the infant's needs. Okay, the child will develop a sense of trust. In other words, the child will expect consistency, sameness, continuity. Right? Things happen in a certain way, and there is stability. Okay. Sameness from other people in the environment. The child learns to trust, basically. The mother meets the child's needs. The mother basically feeds the child, protects the child, right? Keeps the child warm and safe and, provides affection, right? So the child learns to trust other people. The child learns to, basically learns that things are going to be okay. Okay, that things are consistent. Things are going to be okay. There's a pattern here. We can expect more of the same, and we can trust people. We can trust that things are going to be okay. That's a sense of trust. If things don't go very well, if the mother doesn't meet the infant's needs, the child will develop a sense of mistrust. The infant will be rejecting, inattentive, and show inconsistent behavior if the child develops a sense of mistrust. What happens here is that the mother may neglect the child, maybe doesn't properly feed the child, ignores the child, abandons the child, gives up the child, let's say for adoption or something like that. So the child will instead develop a sense of mistrust and will be rejecting, will reject the mother or the father, right? Most likely the mother. The mother's more important. Will be rejecting of the mother, right? Will not trust the mother, will have a sense of mistrust. The mother cannot be counted on. The parent cannot be counted on, right? So the infant instead will be rejecting and will not trust the mother and will have a bad relationship with the mother even down the road. The child will be inattentive and ignore the mother, not really rely too much on her or think too much of her, okay? And will show inconsistent behavior. Sometimes the child will basically show that, the child wants somebody, wants to be protected and loved, and sometimes the child will be afraid and scared and distrustful and won't want to get close to people. That's a sense of mistrust. Basically, the mother didn't meet the needs, and the child has instead learned that the world is a scary and hurtful place. We can't trust mommy. We can't trust anybody. We can't trust the world. That's a sense of mistrust. Okay? If you deal with this stage successfully, you'll develop a basic strength, and that basic strength is called hope. Hope is basically that persistent feeling of confidence, that feeling or that belief that things are going to be okay. Even if things are bad, that things will get better. That is hope. If you deal with this stage successfully, in other words, things go well, you develop a sense of trust, you will have hope. And this will help you down the road. If you develop trust, you'll have trust down the road. You're more likely to trust other people, trust your friends, trust your romantic partner down the road, trust teachers, and maybe even policemen and judges and things like that, right? You develop a sense of trust, okay? But if you develop a sense of mistrust, you will not trust people, and you will carry this with you down the road. You couldn't trust your mother, or let's say your father as well, right? You couldn't trust your parents, so you will not trust other people down the road. You will not be too trusting of your friends, right? And will have more difficulty making friends. You will not trust your romantic partner as much and will be more jealous, more insecure. You'll be less trusting of teachers. You'll be less likely to believe that they have your best interests at heart. You'll be less trusting of just judges and authority figures and believing that they're out to screw you over and to hurt you rather than to help you. And you'll just be less trusting in general. And that will affect you down the road. It will affect you, basically for the rest of your life if this issue doesn't get resolved at some point later on, maybe in therapy or in another loving relationship, because your first relationship didn't go very well. So you didn't really learn to trust people. If you do develop trust, then you have trust and you also have hope, right? That feeling that things are going to be okay. That's the oral sensory stage. And if you think about, say a little bit more about this, if you think about it, those that have not, that have had difficulties during those first couple of years really do show signs of mistrust. If you think about those that have been given up for adoption, those that have been raised in foster care, those that have been neglected or abandoned, they have a lot of issues. They have trouble trusting people, and for good reason, according to Erikson. And we explained why. Let's keep going. So you can see how that is similar to Freud's, first stage, the oral sensory stage, where the child is dependent and, on the mother for survival, and, you see similarities there. But Erikson takes that further and talks about the social issues, the issue of trust, okay? Second stage is called the muscular anal stage, 2 to 3 years of age, okay? Maybe 2 to 4, around there. Notice, right, there's the word anal in there, just like Freud's anal stage. There's some similarities here. During this time, children are developing lots of physical and mental abilities. They're learning how to walk, how to talk, right? And especially how to use the potty. Potty training is crucial, where children learn to let go and hold on, basically. So you can see the similarity there with Freud's theory, right? Potty training is crucial. It's called the muscular anal stage. Children are basically learning all these things, learning how to do things for themselves. And if things go well, children, so the crisis is, can I do things on my own or can I not? That's the crisis. That is the question that must be answered. If things go well, the child will develop autonomy. And autonomy is basically, it's not defined there, but it basically means that you can do things on your own. You can govern yourself, so to speak. That's autonomy. Auto means self, okay? If things go well, the child will develop autonomy. The parents will teach the child, the parents have taught the child when and where to exercise independence, right? You know, okay, you need to go to the potty. You need to use the potty, right? You need to go. Now's the time for you to use the potty. Go sit on that potty and go. It's okay for you to walk and play right here and do this, right? Potty training is what is most crucial. But if things go well, especially during potty training, the child develop a sense of autonomy, right? Look at me. I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl. I can do things on my own. That's autonomy. And according to Erikson, the child will carry this with him or her down the road, and they will feel that they can do things on their own. They have autonomy. This is where autonomy comes from, according to Erikson. If things don't go very well, the child will develop shame and doubt because the parents frustrate the child's attempts at independence, especially at potty training. The parents might tell you, what's wrong with you? You're a big baby. You know, use the potty. What is wrong with you, right? And they're very mean. They're very punishing, okay? And the child will feel very bad and will instead develop shame and doubt. And according to Erikson, the child will carry this shame and doubt down the road and will feel shameful and doubtful about themselves rather than thinking that they can do things on their own, okay? If things go very well, if things go well and you resolve this stage successfully, in other words, you develop autonomy, okay? You will develop the basic strength called will. Will, you will be able to exercise freedom of choice and self-restraint. In other words, you can control yourself. You can govern yourself, right? And that sounds very similar to what Freud said about the anal stage. That's all about potty training and control. Erikson is saying something similar here, but he's also talking about basically, you know, the ability to, you know, not just control oneself, but to do things on one's own. And if things go well, we feel shame and doubt, and then we carry this with us down the road. Okay, so it is very similar to Freud's theory. Let's keep going. The next stage is called the locomotor genital stage. Okay, so notice it says genital there, right? Freud's stage was called the genital stage. Erikson called it the locomotor genital stage, right? 3 to 5 years of age, maybe 4 to 6, okay, around there. Children are developing physical and mental abilities even further, okay? They express the desire to take initiative, the desire to do certain things, okay? And what happens is that if parents deal very well with children at this stage, the children will develop initiative. Initiative is the feeling that basically you don't have to ask for permission. You can start things, you can do things without people telling you. Initiative is a very good thing. You're a self-starter. That's what that means. It's a very good thing to have, okay? You will develop initiative if the parents provide guidance with love and understanding. The child learns what is and what is not allowed. So as a parent, you let your child play. You let your child do things that the child wants to do. You let the child kind of, you know, do things on his or her own. Let them play. Let them get dirty, right? Let them decide for themselves some things. Of course, with guidance, okay? Don't let them run off into the street, okay, and get run over by a car. But let them decide to do some things on their own. They shouldn't always have to ask. They need to show some initiative. And you let them have some initiative. Let them play, let them get dirty, you know, let them scream and run around as long as it's safe. You know, maybe outside it's okay to scream and run around, but maybe not inside. There's rules, right? You have to guide them. But if you do this correctly and you have the right balance, okay, the child will develop initiative. The child will have this sense that They don't always have to ask, that they can decide to do things on their own. They can take the initiative. They can be a self-starter. They don't need to be told what to do all the time. Sometimes they will just do things. That's initiative. If you don't do things very well, instead the child will develop guilt. The parents will, if the parents punish the child and inhibit initiate activities. If it's always no, 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 bad boy, bad girl, don't touch that, right? Don't get dirty, no, you should always ask me, right, if it's okay to do something, right? Instead, the child will feel guilty all the time. And the child will always have to ask you, can I do this? Can I do that, right? Is it okay if I play now? Your child is instead going around feeling guilty all the time and has to ask you all the time, rather than showing initiative. You need to let your children be kids. Let them play. Let them do things on their own. Don't hold them back too much. You need to provide guidance, of course, and rules, but if it's always no, 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 bad boy, bad girl, right, then instead they will develop guilt. And they will carry this guilt with them down the road. And later on, right, when they're in college, when they're adults, and you're no longer there yelling at them, telling them to do something, right, telling them to study, telling them to go to school, right? Rather than going to school, rather than studying, rather than initiating things on their own, they will feel guilty. They won't do it, and instead they feel guilty that they should be doing something, but they're not. If they develop initiative, then down the road, you won't have to tell them to study and to work hard. You won't have to tell them to look for a job. They will have that initiative, according to Erikson. They have learned it early on. So it's a very good thing for them to develop that initiative. Because if they don't have it, then they don't take the initiative. They don't do things on their own when they're grown up down the road, because there's no one there telling them what to do anymore. Instead, they will just feel guilty. They'll know they have to do things, but they won't do them, and they'll just feel guilty about it. If things go well during this stage, they'll develop the basic strength called purpose. That is the courage to envision and pursue goals. That is purpose. They will develop purpose, right? Because they have initiative. I am going to do this. I'm going to achieve this. I'm going to pursue this. That is purpose. That is what you gain if you deal with this stage successfully. It's very important to have initiative, right? A lot of people lack it, and that's why sometimes they don't succeed. The next stage is called the latency stage. 6 to 11 years of age, latency. Latency stage, right? Same thing as Freud. I think he called it the latency stage as well. The latent period is what Freud called it. Latent means hidden. So the latency stage, right? Remember, according to Freud's theory, is when basically children suppress their, their urges, their sexual urges, and instead use that energy for play and school and basically friendships and things like that. Erikson is basically saying the same thing over here, except he went a little bit further. During the latency stage, the child learns work and study habits at home and at school. The child learns rules, uses tools, refines skills, builds things. So this is a very productive time for children. They go to school, they're at home too, and they learn, right? It's just like Freud was saying, they use their energy for productive things, for learning. They learn how to read, how to write, how to do math. They use the energy for friendships, learning social rules, right? Learning skills, all kinds of things, okay? Erikson is not really talking about sexual urges being repressed here, but he is talking about energy being used, for productive things. If things go well during this stage, the child will develop a sense of industriousness or a sense of industry. Okay, what that means, it's not defined there for you guys, so hopefully you're paying attention, or you'll pay attention later when you watch the video. But a sense of industry means that you basically you are productive. You get things done. You try things and you do well at school, right? You learn things, you learn how to do things, you build things. You can read, you can write. That's a sense of industry, okay? And it's a good thing to have, right? To learn how to get things done, learn how to be productive. It will help you down the road, because you will have plenty of things to do down the road. And you have to achieve things and produce things, right? And create things. You'll have to do that. You need the sense of industriousness. Right? And if you really have this, you might even start your own business later on and be able to, achieve things and build things and produce things. But we all produce and build things, okay? And this happens if you develop a sense of industriousness, if the parents encourage the child to work hard and persist, right? Things don't go well sometimes, right? You get up, you dust yourself off, you try again, right? You don't give up, right? School might be hard, math might be hard, whatever it is. It might be hard to learn how to read at first, learn how to write, but you keep trying and you get better at it and eventually you succeed. You keep persisting. The parents, and not just the parents, but also the teachers encourage the child to do this. And develop a sense of industriousness. If things don't go well, the child will develop instead a sense of inferiority. The parents scold the child, ridicule the child, reject the child's attempts, right? The parents might say things to the child like, you know, why are you so stupid? Why the hell can't you read? What's wrong with you? Why, you know, like, why can't you do math, right? And you'll experience a lot of frustration as a parent, by the way, when your children are learning, right? Teachers are trying to teach them how to read and how to write and how to do math, right, in grade school. But you as a parent too should be helping them, you know, and you're going to find it very hard, okay? But, you know, if you let your frustration get the best of you, you're going to, you know, yell at your child and call them stupid and worthless and what the hell's wrong with you and that kind of stuff. And that could also happen at school, by the way, when you have very mean teachers who don't believe in your kid and might also say things like this to your kid. But basically, the child is being scolded and ridiculed and, you know, being called stupid and, you know, and you're rejecting their attempts. They try something and you say, oh, this is worthless. This is a piece of crap. You know, what the hell? This is stupid. You know, and instead you'll make your child feel inferior. You'll develop a sense of inferiority and they will carry this with them down the road and will feel inferior down the road. And will feel like they're stupid. Will feel like they're not much, that they're inferior, okay? That's not what you want for your child. If things go well during this stage, the basic strength to be achieved is the sense of competence, right? They will feel competence. They will feel that they can exert skill and intelligence to get something done. They will feel that they're competent. They can get things done. They can work well with things, that they know how to do things, okay? That's the basic strength. And by the way, as far as the crisis is always basically those things there, industry versus inferiority. Are they going to get this or that, right? So here, the question the child must answer is basically, am I successful or am I worthless? A child that develops industriousness will feel that they are successful, that they can get things done. They will have positive self-esteem. They'll feel good about themselves. They're intelligent, they're smart, they can get things done. But there are those who will feel inferior and will have low self-esteem. I'm stupid, I'm not worth much, right? And they will carry this with them, according to Erikson. It will affect them down the road. You want your child to feel competent, to develop a sense of industriousness, to have positive self-esteem, high self-esteem. That's what happens during the latency period. And like I said, it's very similar to Freud's theory, right? Freud talked about children suppressing sexual urges and instead using energy for productive things, for school, for friendships, for, you know, learning things basically. And Erikson is saying the same thing here, but he's adding that if things don't go well, your child will feel inferior and will feel this inferiority down the road. If things do go well, your child will have a sense of industriousness, positive self-esteem, will feel competent, and they'll have this with them down the road. That's the latency period. The next stage is called adolescence. And by the way, yeah, adolescence, for Erikson, well, here's where it really gets to be different from Freud. The first 4 stages that we just talked about are very similar to Freud's stages. They are very similar. Okay, from here on out, it's a bit different. Okay, because Freud doesn't get much further than this. Okay, the next stage is called adolescence, 12 to 18 years of age. Adolescence, okay, it's basically, you know, puberty, and you know, when you're a teenager, basically. It starts as early as 12, by the way. I do want to point out that puberty can start a lot earlier now. There are children who start puberty at 11, even 10. Some have been known to start puberty as early as 8. So it's not really the same as puberty. It's adolescence. It's that time basically when children become very aware of themselves and they become very concerned about what other people think of them. That's this adolescence period. According to Erikson, the issue here is ego identity. It is identity, their self-image. They become very concerned about what others think about them and what they think about themselves. They experiment with different identities. Should I look this way? Should I look that way? Should I be this kind of person, that kind of person, and different roles? You know, they may try, for instance, to be maybe your child decides that they're the smart kid and they're going to try that role, right? Or your kid decides that, oh, I'm a jock, I'm an athlete, and they're going to join the football team or something like that. Or they're going to be, one of the cool kids who just likes to party, or whatever, But children develop different roles, different identities, and they experiment with things, okay? They might try out different roles and different identities. And hopefully it's healthy ones, okay? But they become very self-aware, very concerned about their self-image. Remember, during this time, this is when you really cared about your hair and what your hair looked like. You probably still do, but you cared more back then. You really cared about your clothes, right? And wanting to wear the right clothes and wanting to be cool and fit in, right? That is adolescence. You're very concerned about your self-image. It is all about identity, according to Erikson. You're very concerned about your identity. So ego identity, right? That's what you're concerned about. Your just identity, to put it bluntly. If things go well, you develop identity cohesion, which means you develop a strong sense of identity. You learn who you are, you find out who you are, right? You know who you are, and your confidence in your role, your confidence in what you have confidence in who you are, and therefore what you should do with yourself. And this will help you down the road, of course. If you know who you are, you know what you're about, then it'll help you down the road when it comes to choosing a career and it comes to other things. But you need to know who you are. You develop an identity cohesion if things go well. If things don't go well, you develop what's called identity confusion. You have an identity crisis. You don't know who you are. You're confused about your identity, your role in life. So you might find that you don't fit in school. Or maybe you're not, one of the smart kids, so to speak. So you might try instead to be one of the cool kids, and you find out maybe you're not cool. Or maybe you try to, be a jock, but, you're not that athletic. You don't know who the heck you are. You don't know where you fit in. If things go really bad, you might develop an unhealthy kind of identity where you decide that, I'm a screw up, and you're going to be a delinquent. And then maybe you can become a gang member and a criminal down the road. You don't want to have confusion about your identity, and you don't want to develop those very unhealthy identities. But those that do, those that become delinquents and gang members and basically criminals down the road, have an identity problem. They don't know who they are. And so therefore they choose things that are bad for themselves, bad for society. They are confused. And very often they are confused because their home is basically chaotic. Often dad is missing, dad's not there. And that boy doesn't know what it means to be a man or who they are because their father is not there. And that's a very important thing, by the way. Often when the father is missing, the children are more likely, the boys are more likely to develop problems with delinquency and to join a gang later on and become criminals. It's important that both parents are there, but the absence of the father will affect especially the identity of the male child. Also the female, of course, important as well, but it's especially important for the identity of the male child. If you don't know where you come from, how can you know who you are? You don't know who your dad is. That kind of stuff. Imagine those that don't even know who their parents are, right? A lot of confusion there about identity. They are more at risk for developing problems down the road and developing unhealthy identities. If things go well and you do develop identity cohesion and you know who you are, right? Whether it's one of the smart kids or one of the jocks or one of the cool kids or whatever it is. Remember, there are these cliques in like junior high and even especially in high school. If you do have a good sense of identity, you will develop the basic strength of fidelity. Fidelity means loyalty, okay? That means you'll be sincere, genuine, you'll have a sense of duty. You know who you are, you're true to yourself, right? And you're genuine, right? Not fake. And you have a sense of duty, right? You know what you are about and what you're going to do with yourself. That is the basic strength he called fidelity. You carry these problems down the road if you don't resolve things well, okay? For instance, just to give you an example, adolescence, right? If you didn't develop a sense of trust early on, right? That will affect your identity. You don't trust your own parents, right? You don't trust people. And if you don't trust your own parents, or you don't know who the heck they are, then it's hard for you to resolve your identity, right? Or if you don't feel competent, then it's harder for you to develop an identity because you don't think you're that smart. You don't think that you're that good. And you're not going to do well in school, or you're not going to try. You don't think you're even that cool, whatever it is. If you don't develop a sense of competency, it will affect your identity as well. All these things that we talked about, they build up, and if you have problems at one stage, you'll have problems in future stages as well. But it really begins to add up as we get into the later stages, especially with your identity. After that, you enter young adulthood, 18 to 35 years of age. The aim of young adulthood, according to Erikson, is to establish an intimate relationship, to express sexual and also feelings of caring and commitment. The purpose of young adulthood is to find someone and settle down, basically. That's what Erikson is talking about. 18 to 35, okay? This is young adulthood. Now, in the past, people settled down very early. As soon as you finish high school, right, 18 years old, people settled down, got married, and have kids. Now, people are putting it off, okay? Now, people are more likely to get married and settle down in their later 20s or even their mid-30s. I waited until like, well, how old was I? Let me see. I was like, you know, I was like 35 when I got married. Okay, so I put things off. But the young adulthood is to really to settle down, basically to find someone, develop that intimate relationship, that romantic relationship, you know, get married, settle down, and have children. That's the aim of young adulthood. If things go well, you develop a sense of intimacy. Okay, you find a partner and you develop a mature adult relationship. Okay, so in other words, you have someone that you love and they love you back and you are connected, right? You help each other out and you have a good relationship. If things don't go well, you instead develop isolation. You feel isolated. You don't develop intimacy. You can't find anyone. Or you feel that there's no one who's good enough or no one who you can trust, right? You feel isolated, lonely, sometimes fearful of contact, fearful of rejection. You might be rejecting of others and even aggressive and mad because you're lonely and isolated and you feel hurt, you feel abandoned. And you can see here very well how your sense of trust that you should have developed in that first stage is very important for this, very important for you to have trust in others, for you to develop that good relationship. And you could see very well how basically your sense of identity, if you know who you are, how that will be important for you to find someone who's good for you. If you don't know who you are, it's going to be hard for you to find the right person for you. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, by the way, right? But the better your sense of identity, right, the easier it is to find the person who's right for you. And a lot of you don't really know very much, you know, who you are. And so you get involved with the wrong people. You know what? Not all of you are going to meet someone at the club, okay? Or at the bar or the, you know, the nightclub or at the party. Some of you are just not those kind of people. You're more likely to find someone in class, at school, at the library. You have to be true to who you are. You have to know who you are. So you find, and then you find the right places where you'll find people like yourself. We're not all these party people, popular people, cool people. We don't all belong in those situations. And sometimes when we meet those kind of people, those are wrong for us, okay? You can see how identity, your sense of trust, and all the other things we talked about that I'm not gonna really get into because it would take too much time, but all those other things will affect your ability to find the right partner. It all builds on itself, right? Competence, you know, autonomy, the sense that you can do things on your own, all those things matter. If things go well, the basic strength that you develop is called love. Erikson called it love. Mutual devotion and shared identity, right? You're devoted to someone, they're devoted to you, right? You love them, they love you, and you have a shared identity. They complete you, so to speak. Who you are also involves who you're with. And they're a part of you, and you're a part of them. And without them, you are not who you are. You know, and I feel this is very true. With my wife, I do believe we have a shared identity. Without my wife, my life is completely different. I am not the same person. Without my wife and kids, who the hell am I? I know who I am, but I'll tell you this now. I'm not the same person. Okay, I would be someone different. But yeah, you develop a shared identity. Okay, you complete each other. You are a part of each other's identity. You affect each other and you make each other different. Hopefully you bring out the best in each other and not the worst. Let's keep going. And then you enter adulthood. Erikson called the period of adulthood 35 to 55 years of age. This is when you're really an adult, right? When you're more mature, so to speak, right? The aim of adulthood is to teach and guide the next generation. It could involve family, society, government, social services, right? Work, very important thing for adulthood, right? But the aim of adulthood, to put it bluntly, is for you to be productive, right? To do something for the next generation, to do your part for society, to help others. You don't have to actually have a job, right? Even if you're just a stay-at-home mom and you're raising good kids, right? You're doing your part, okay? But most people do have a job. They don't just raise children, right, and help society in that way, hopefully by raising good kids and kids that are going to do good for society, but also with their job, whether you're a fireman or a construction worker or a teacher, you're being productive, right? You're helping your generation, you're helping the generation, right, your society, but you're also guiding the next generation. That is productivity, okay? That is the aim of adulthood, right? It's to basically generate something of value, okay? If things go well, you experience what's called generativity. You generate things of value. You contribute to society in a lasting way. You help others, okay? If things don't go very well, you develop stagnation, okay? In other words, you don't go anywhere. You don't contribute, right? You have this midlife crisis where you don't contribute. You feel bored. You lack purpose. You don't know who you are and you don't know what to do with yourself. That's that midlife crisis. You know, it's like, what the hell am I doing? My life is half over and I haven't accomplished anything. And what the hell's going on? And you start reevaluating your life. That's that midlife crisis. But that is stagnation, where you don't feel you're contributing. You don't feel like you're really getting much done. You're bored. You feel like you have no purpose. Stagnation, basically, just like stagnant water, it doesn't move. It means you're not going anywhere. And when stagnant water sits there and becomes unhealthy, when you stagnate, you don't go anywhere. Basically, you sit there and you fester. You don't do much. It's a very unhealthy thing. And you also have a midlife crisis. You have no idea who you are and what you want to do with yourself, and you don't have purpose, okay? And you can see how basically having a family, of course, you know, having, you know, dealing with the previous stages, you know, having trust and identity and all a good sense of identity, all those things will affect your ability to do this. If you deal with this correctly, you'll develop the basic strength called care, right? Broad concern for others and the need to teach, right? In other words, care, right? You care for others and you want to guide and teach others and the next generation. You have a need especially to teach something to the younger children. And some people actually do teach, that's their job. But all people want to somehow guide and teach the next generation, even if they're not teachers. You want to give, you know, you want to talk to people who are younger than you, and you want to talk to others and share your thoughts, all those things, and you want to produce things of value. You want to guide and you want to produce things, right? And you often do that at your job as well. That's adulthood. And then you enter late adulthood. Late adulthood is basically 55 and onward. This is when you're older and you're looking back on your life and you're asking yourself, how did it go? So you look back and you evaluate your whole life. Your major endeavors are near completion. You're old. You may not have a lot of time left. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But you're looking back on your life and you are asking yourself about how it went. You might be near retirement or maybe even retired already. But you're looking back and evaluating your life. If things went well, you are filled with a sense of integrity. You feel a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction. You're satisfied with how things went, right? You accept your place, you accept your past, and you remain active, right? Even though you might retire or maybe you continue working, you remain active, right? And providing advice and helping out people, right? And doing things. That's if you have a sense of integrity, right? If you have a sense of despair, if you instead have a sense of despair, you do have a sense of despair, when you look back, right? You look back and you feel frustrated and angry and regretful over many mistakes, right? You look back and you ask yourself, you know, what happened in my life? Where did the time go? What the hell happened to me? You know, I had all these plans, I could have done all these things, and nothing worked out. You feel frustrated, angry, a lot of regrets. You feel despair, disgusted, and bitter. Those are those angry older people, the ones who are angry, right? Who feel they're wasted their life and made mistakes. You know, you're angry senior citizens. Get out of my way, you damn hippie. You know, those people are really mean. those would be those people, according to Erikson, right? They have a sense of despair, that feel that they didn't accomplish what they wanted to accomplish, that they wasted their lives, that they didn't do what they should have done, right? That's the sense of despair. If things go well during this stage and instead you develop ego integrity, you look back and you feel satisfied and fulfilled, you will have the basic strength called wisdom, integration of past experience. You'll be able to look back and you'll understand things. And you'll have this wisdom, this understanding that comes with life experience, and you'll be able to share that wisdom with others, right? That is the strength to be developed. All right, let's keep going. I feel like maybe I'm going too slow if I really want to get this done in one lecture. We'll see. Assessment when it comes to Erikson's theory. So that was the theory. It's a lifelong theory, right? 8 stages that span the entire lifespan. Assessment in Erikson's theory. Erikson used certain things to, try to understand the people he was trying to help, right? He used play therapy, where children were provided toys, right? So they can express interactions that may be difficult because of limited mental and verbal ability. So children may play with toys a certain way. They can't really tell you what's happening, very well. They can't express it very well, but they may be able to show you with toys. Like if they play, that the toys are fighting and stuff like that, they may be experiencing that at home. Or if the toys seem to be acting out, things that are sexual, they might be expressing to you that maybe they've been exposed to some things they shouldn't have been exposed to, or maybe they've even been sexually abused. Play therapy can be useful for those things, for allowing children to express themselves and express difficulties they may have. Erikson also used psychohistorical analysis. He looked at biographical studies. He looked at the biographies of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Einstein, all these people, to try to understand their point of view. And that's where he got a lot of his ideas about the stages of life, is by looking at the biographies of important people. And he has been criticized for that, saying, well, we're not all like these important people. We're not all going to be these great people. And is it really fair, right, to compare us to those people, that saying these are the stages based on these people? I think the stages still apply, but he got a lot of his ideas by studying these very famous people, by studying their biographies, the life of these people. Assessment when it comes to Erikson's theory. There are psychological tests, questionnaires that try to assess things that have to do with Erikson's theory. There's the ego identity scale and the ego identity process questionnaire that's designed to measure ego identity during adolescence. All right. The ego identity scale, I actually have it, and I'll post it for you guys, make it available so you can look at it. If we were in class, I would pass this out, you'd fill it out, I showed you how to score it, and then we'd talk about it, and that's where the other lecture would come in. But instead, I'm just gonna post it and let you guys look at it on your own. There's the Loyola Generativity Scale. This is more appropriate for when you're older. I'll post that one too, so you can look at it. This is more appropriate for when you're older, and you basically evaluate the extent to which, you think you've generated anything of value. And, those that are older should have a greater generativity if things have gone okay. But you can look at those on your own. Same criticisms with Erikson's theory as we have with all the others that we've talked about. He wasn't a scientist, so you can't really verify or replicate what he did. Can't quantify. He wasn't a researcher. He wasn't a scientist. He didn't really do things like the way scientists do. No verbatim records, no word-for-word records. Non-representative sample, right? I mean, he treated people for psychological problems, okay? So you can't really generalize from those people who were unhealthy, right? The analysis of his data was subjective, if he had any data at all, unreliable, right? He wasn't a scientist. So same criticisms that we've always had. Eventually, like I said, we'll get past that. Research on Erikson's theory. Experimental tests of Erikson's concepts, right? They've done research where they have children, play with things and basically construct things, what are called play constructions. And it shows that boys build action scenes while girls build more static, peaceful scenes, showing that very stereotypical thing, right? The boys are more active, more aggressive, right? And more into things that reflect danger and adventure and things like that, where girls are more into more kind of peaceful scenes or things that have to do with relationships and things like that, right? Things that have to do with social gatherings. And that reflects identity and gender development. Trust and security. Research supports what Erikson said about trust and security, that infants with a more secure attachment to their parents, right, the ones that have a better relationship with their parents, the ones that have a sense of trust to their mother, they're more curious, more sociable, more popular, they get along better with other people in general, okay? Because they trust others, they believe more in others. They like others more, other people like them more, they have more of a sense of trust, okay? Research on other things about Erikson's theory, experimental tests, right? Psychological stages, stories based on pictures of 4-year-olds concern autonomy, right? Just like, you know, Freud and Erikson's talked about that autonomy is important during 4 years of age. Those of older kids reflect their later stages. So the stories that children build with pictures, or they tell with pictures, do really support Erikson's theories, you know, that we go through certain stages and that certain things become more important in some of those stages. Adolescents with an identity crisis had not successfully resolved their earlier stages. Those adolescents that have problems with identity, right, they also had problems at earlier stages, probably with trust or maybe with competence or something like that, with industriousness, you know, with autonomy, okay, just like I was saying. Erikson noted that the identity confusion in his study of Native American tribes, you think about what happened to them, how they're basically, their culture was disruptive and destroyed, and many of them were wiped out and killed off, right? Torn from their homes, right? They were actually forced to acculturate and go to school and forced to give up their traditional ways of dressing and their long hair. Their identity, their culture, it was almost destroyed. And when Erikson studied these tribes, a lot of them had a lot of identity confusion because of this. Okay, and you can see how that makes a lot of sense, right? Other things, oh, here's something that's very important. There's someone known as James Marcia, which took this issue of identity further. Erikson talked about identity and how it's very important to develop a healthy, stable identity. Or if things don't go well, you develop an unstable identity, or you know, or you have an, you know, more of an identity crisis. James Marcia took that further, and he said that when it comes to identity, right, when it comes to identity, there are 4 possibilities. You can have what's called identity achievement, which is what Erikson talked about, right? The good thing about identity, right? Where you resolve your identity, you're committed to an occupation and an ideology, you believe in something, you have something you believe in, right? Identity achievement, right? Those are those that thought about who they are, they were worried about it, and they made a decision and they know who they are. They set realistic goals for themselves. They cope with those environmental demands, right? They can deal effectively with their environment. That's those that have a healthy identity. But there are those instead who have who haven't yet developed an identity, who haven't achieved identity achievement, and instead have what we call are going through what we call a moratorium. A moratorium is a timeout. Those are the ones that are experiencing a moratorium are the ones who basically are concerned about their identity. They're thinking about it, but they haven't yet made a decision. They haven't yet decided who they are. So it's like a timeout. It's like timeout, I need more time, right? So they do have an identity crisis, right? They don't know really who they are. They're concerned about it. They haven't committed yet to an occupation. They don't know what they want to do with themselves. They don't know what to believe yet. They don't know who they are. They're concerned about who they are, but they haven't made a decision yet. So they're ambivalent about authority. They don't know about whether, for instance, they should believe people who are older, believe what they tell them, right? They're kind of indecisive. They may act childish sometimes, right? They just don't know yet. And they're saying, I just need more time to figure things out. That's the identity moratorium. This would be, by the way, those people that decide that, for instance, that, you know, they're going to go to college. They need more time to figure out what career they want to have and to learn a career and to find out. Going to college is a moratorium to a large extent, right? You don't know what you want to do with yourself yet. So you go to college and there's all these choices about what you can major in, what you can study. That is what it's about. You're trying to find yourself, right? You're trying to find out what you can do with yourself, who you are and what you want to do with yourself. It's a moratorium. You haven't figured it out yet. College is going to help you do that. As you take different classes, you should learn more about who you are and what you should do with yourself. Or for some people, it could be that they, for instance, join the military. Say, I don't know, I'm going to join the military and, you know, just take some time before I decide to have any, you know, career, right? I'm just going to, you know, go into the military and, you know, take some time off and, you know, well, That, you know, depending on what's happening, you can experience different things. There are people who are wealthy. Their moratorium is to travel. They graduate high school and parents say, okay, you know, what do you want to do with yourself? You going to go to college? Like, I don't know if I want to start yet, dad or mom or whatever it is. And, you know, and the parents, I say, okay, you know what, let's travel for a few years. And they go and they travel the world and they go this place and that place. And they learn a lot about different cultures and different things. They learn about who they are as they travel. And then they can come back and decide, okay, yeah, I want to, you know, I want to do this. I want to go to college, or I want to study this, or maybe I want to join the family business or whatever it is. And that's moratorium. That means it's a timeout. You need more time to figure it out. And then there's identity foreclosure. By the way, moratorium is, yeah, it's different. Identity achievement is what you want. You ultimately want to get there. But identity foreclosure is not healthy. Identity foreclosure is basically those that really didn't have an identity crisis. They didn't really care too much about their identity. They didn't really think about it that much. They weren't too worried about it. But they committed to an occupation, to an ideology that was set by the parents. In other words, these are the people who were just told what to do and they just accepted it. Hey, son, you know, we're a military family. You're just going to join the military and that's going to be your career. Or you know what? You're going to take over the family business. That's who you are. That's what you're going to do. Or you're going to be a doctor just like your daddy, right? Or you're going to be, you know, whatever it is, an artist like your dad, you know, and they really are just told what to do and they go along with it. Their parents tell them what to think and what to do. And they say, okay, that is not as healthy. That is foreclosure, right? You didn't think about it and you made a choice that was not your choice. You just went along with other people. They're kind of rigid and authoritarian. You know, they believe that things have to be a certain way and they believe what their parents tell them, right? They have difficulty coping with change. By the way, this reminds me, this is also the case for those that are very religious. And the parents tell them, hey, this is what we are. We are Christian or we are Muslim or we're this. And this is what we believe. And that is what you need to believe. And there's no arguing about it. Or you're going to be a preacher just like your daddy. You're going to be a stay-at-home mom just like your mom. Your job is to raise the kids. That's very typical of people who are extremely religious, very rigid and very authoritarian. Not a good thing, right? For you not to get a choice as to, you know, what you're going to be, and for you not to be concerned about it, not think about it. They are achievement oriented. They do care about achieving things, but they believe more in external than internal goals. It's more about like, you know, yeah, I'm going to be successful. I'm going to have a house and a car and all this stuff. They don't really think about who they are and what that means. People decided for them. This is who you are. This is what you should achieve. This is what you should have. This is what you should believe. That's foreclosure. It is not healthy. Identity diffusion is even more unhealthy. Identity diffusion is where you don't have an identity crisis. You don't care about who you are. You don't think about it, right? And you're not committed to any occupation or ideology. You didn't make a decision about as to what job to take on, what to study, right? What to believe, right? You don't care. And you're not going to make a decision. In other words, you know, screw everybody. I don't give a shit, you know? You reject commitments, aimless drifting. You got to do whatever the hell you want, when you want. You're not going to commit to anything. You don't know who you are, and you're not going to make a decision, and you're not going to let yourself be tied down to any occupation. And basically, you don't resolve an identity. You don't care, and you don't make a decision. Distant relationship with parents. You are not as connected with your parents. You're like a drifter. And there are people like that. You don't have to be a drifter, but it's the kind of people who don't make a decision and who don't care. It could be that they are drifters and they go from place to place, right? Bumming around or aimless wandering. And by the way, you can do that when you're rich as well. Just wander around, you know, and travel here and there. Never make a decision. Don't care about who you are or what you're about. You can also do that because, you know, let's say you're just going to smoke weed the whole time, or you're just going to be a drug addict. You don't give a damn. That's identity diffusion. It's very unhealthy. Okay, let's keep going. Last slide over here. There are those who have what is called an alienated achievement, which is really bad. Alienated achievement are those that do have an identity crisis. They are concerned about who they are, but they didn't commit to an occupation or ideology, right? And instead, they're very critical of social and the economic system. These are those people who did think about who they are. They were concerned about it, but they didn't commit to an occupation or anything like that. And they're just very distrustful of the system of government, of education, of society in general. Like, you know, screw it, man. It's the man is trying to keep you down, or it's a government, man. We can't trust government. The system, man, it's the system. You don't know what they're doing. They're trying to control your mind and what you think and what you do. Those kind of people, right? Sometimes they're, you know, they're bums or drifters. Sometimes there are people who basically are anarchists and just have guns and don't want anybody to tell them what to do. And sometimes they're just people who are just live in their own communities and want to be left alone and are paranoid of any kind of authority and want to be away from any kind of authority, any kind of government. They don't believe in the government, those kind of people. They are cerebral, they do think, they are philosophical, but they're also very cynical, very distrustful, they see the worst in people and the worst in government, the worst in institutions, and they don't believe in them. Okay, and that is also a very unhealthy identity. Okay, that is where we will stop. So let me stop recording.